Welcome to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Annalee Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
Good morning and welcome to our Spell Life podcast, where we share education and resources on how to be well and stay well. Good morning, Gaynell.
Good morning,
Did
Jill.
you get your coffee in this morning?
I'm getting it.
You're getting it.
I'm filling up. I'm refueling.
Well, you know what I started over the last couple of weeks? Somebody said it's really good to have water and lemon in the morning, and you should have it first thing when you wake up. Mm-hmm. Well, that hasn't worked for me because I'll tell you what, I dream of coffee in the morning. Like I wake up and I so want that smell and taste
Coffee's
of a fantastic.
Gets me out of bed.
Yes,
it's like the first thing I think of.
But what I'm doing over the last week, I'm going to see if it makes a difference. After my cups of coffee, notice cups, 2 cups at least, I'm doing water with lemon with electrolytes.
Ooh, aren't you the good girl?
I'll see if it makes me feel,
okay.
I don't know, more
Let us
hydrated.
know.
So anyways, we are super excited about our conversation today.
It's better than your green drink, sorry.
Yeah. To have a conversation today that I think will hit all of our audience, and if you haven't had experience with it, you will some point in time in your life.
I know it touches home with us.
Yeah. So I want to introduce our guest today, Annalee Kruger, who is the owner and the developer of Care Right. She started Care Right in 2011 after working in a long-term care communities for over 18 years with families that were always in crisis, needing help understanding aging issues, dementia, progression, caregiver burnout, care options, how to pay for care, what to look for and ask about when touring care communities, and helping families repair the strained relationships that often occur with aging without a plan. Annalee also started a nonprofit, the Care Crusade, a national campaign to improve the quality of care for our seniors and vulnerable adults. She's a sought-after national speaker and a podcast guest on aging, planning, aging issues, dementia care, improving family communications throughout the aging process, and many other topics. So welcome, Annalee. We're super excited about our conversation today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Good. I know. Us too. And, Gaynell and I were just going back to our experience with caring for our parents. They passed away several years ago. But it was an interesting dynamic because my mom had 7 children. She was a big caretaker all her life. Lots of energy,
and
always
ruler.
caring. And the ruler of the care
household.
roost. Yeah, that's right. And then probably in her late 70s to early 80s, she had vascular dementia. And so she started to not be able to really do the things that she just normally did for being able to take care of my father and all the kids.
Well, that was at the same time that he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. So he lost his physical health and she lost her mental health.
And it was interesting because my dad then became the caretaker for my mom. And that was an interesting experience because he had never really been a caretaker.
No. Very giving person, but not necessarily a caretaker. And, we went into that realm of a healthcare for our parents totally blindly. But we were fortunate to come across some people that were very, very helpful for us.
Yeah, and I think, what we think about is we have 7 kids in the family, Annalee, and all of us played a role, which is unusual. We had family meetings, and the only reason we did that, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, is because myself and a couple of my siblings are in the financial business. So we deal with this all the time. And the interesting thing is it was even challenging for our family. Right?
Oh, yeah.
We know it. We have lots of family. We communicate. We took turns. It still was challenging. So I'd love to start with just the conversation. What is an aging plan, and what does Care Right, how do you get involved in that?
Yeah, so so your family situation is a little bit unique because in many families they don't have family meetings. They just don't. We know that 58% of family adult children get thrust into the role of family caregiving without ever having any kind of conversation about the what ifs of aging. So an aging plan is I facilitate family meetings. Most families need a neutral third party person because otherwise there's too much emotional junk that gets in the way. And I'm a neutral third party person, right? And so the other reason I think a lot of families don't have these types of conversations about the what ifs is because they don't know what to talk about. They're in uncharted territory, right? And how are you supposed to develop your own aging plan or facilitate your own family meeting if you don't understand the dynamics of healthcare, of aging, and dementia progression? So a Care Right aging plan is I facilitate 5 to 8 family meetings. Families come to me in crisis. I rarely, like 8% of the time, do I get families that come to me proactively. 92% of my clients come to me in crisis. They are totally burned out. They are resentful of their caregiving situation. They realize that it's not sustainable. They're a mess, and their parents are medically complex. We also have blended families, right? And so sometimes the medical crisis is the time when actually all these kids from the blended marriage are actually meeting for the first time. If it's a late in life wedding, for example, and they've only been married 8 or 10 years, those kids probably haven't even met before.
Wow. Not a good thing to come together, right? For a first meeting.
That's why I look like this. I look all haggard. Like, holy cow. So when I started Care Right, I really had this grandiose thought that I personally could change the world and get to these families proactively and say, hey, let's sit down and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of aging proactively when things are still going well. Because when families wait until they're in a medical crisis or the disease progression or mom is sundowning to the point where she's trying to jump off of a balcony, that's pretty intense then, right? So my goal has always been to reach families proactively and say, let's talk and let's have these family meetings. Let's put an aging plan in place sooner rather than later when emotions aren't high and we aren't forced into making big decisions quickly. So that's why I facilitate the family meeting. It's 5 to 8 family meetings. I have a whole process that I use that I just continually tweak because it's the process that works. So what I mean by that is I start out with a strategy session and a discovery session with the adult kids. And the reason I do that without having mom and dad on the call yet is because no parent wants to see or hear their kids disagree about them in front of them, whether we're in the living room, my office, or on Zoom, right? So I facilitate 5 to 8 family meetings. Through the course of the process I use, I get everyone's perspective, everyone's thoughts and feelings. We find out what's working well, what's not working well. And usually when families reach out to me, they are in crisis. So there's not a lot that is working well. They're really burned out. The daughters and sons have been missing work, and they're just really emotionally fried. And the primary caregiver is quite ill because they've jeopardized their own health to be a caregiver. So we facilitate 5 to 8 family meetings. We talk about what's working, what's not working well, what's the most urgent need that we need to solve for first. And that's usually caregiver burnout. And we need to get some sort of home solutions in place if that's the route to go. Most seniors want to age in place at home. Nobody's got it on their bucket list to leave their home and go to an assisted living or into a nursing center. So we talk about the good and the bad and the ugly of aging in place at home and what that really looks like. And what's the plan if your companion doesn't show up for their shift and you're scheduled for a 12-hour shift and there's no one that can take care of you. The pandemic has underlined what many of us in our industry have been shouting from the rooftops for decades about healthcare systems in a plight. We're in our own plight with a shortage of good quality workers, and the pandemic really underlined that. So a lot of my aging plan is just educating families on what to expect. If your goal is to age in place at home, that's great, but oftentimes it doesn't always pan out that way, or it's not safe, feasible, or viable.
So what's the plan? Where is mom and dad going to live if they can't stay at home? So one of those family meetings is just talking about where does it make sense for mom and dad to live if they're not able to stay at home? If the 4 kids live in 4 different states and mom and dad live in Tucson, Arizona, the kids can't just keep flying back and forth every time there's a crisis. Right? It's just not feasible. Before the pandemic, I always asked my clients, how much money did you spend in airfare, just in airfare and travel, the year before you retained CareRight for an aging plan? And the average was $15,000 out of pocket just for travel.
Wow.
The year before, because when you get those crisis calls, airfare is not $69.
Right.
It's $1,200.
And today it's probably double and triple.
It's double that. And so that's fine if you have gazillions of dollars, but that doesn't mean that that's how you want to spend your time, your energy, and your finances. And spouses can be supportive for the first trip or 2, but when they start seeing the bank account just less and less every time, even the most loving and supportive spouses are like, look, honey, you need to get a handle on this and figure this out. Well, what are they supposed to do when they don't know what they don't know? So a lot of this aging plan is really just intense education for these families so that they can make informed decisions. Most families, when they come to us, they know that they're burned out, but they don't realize how really burned out they are.
Boy, it's tough to make good decisions when you're in that state of mind, right?
And they don't have a lot of emotional bandwidth. So even putting an aging plan in place, they know that that's the solution that they have to do, but they're like, oh my gosh, this is going to take even more energy. And I said, yes, it does. It takes a lot of energy for all of us. It's not a cakewalk, but if you do nothing, you're going to still have the same results that you have right now, and you're going to just be that much more burned out. Right. So what's the plan if we can't stay at home and age in place at home like you want? Well, we need to start looking at care communities. And so my team and we do about 30 to 40-ish matrix projects a week for families all across the country. So because kids don't live near their parents usually anymore. Right. That's why I went virtual in the first place. 30 years ago, when I first started as a social worker, I could do all of these family meetings in mom and dad's living room because the kids all lived down the street. But I went virtual as soon as I opened my business in 2011 because families don't live near each other. And it's silly for them to have to jump on a plane or take a day off of work just to meet with me. Right. So I'm like, because they're like, oh, I can't take any more time off. I already took time off work last time, for mom's medical crisis. And I'm like, you don't have to take time off work. We just do it on, back then it was Skype.
Right.
We talk about where does it make sense for mom and dad to live if they can't stay at home. And if mom and dad live in Tucson, Arizona, their 4 kids live in 4 different states, the kids will say, well, let's explore options in each of our locations. And so my team and I do all the market research. We get the state surveys. We look at the staffing model, their ranking with Medicare, the floor plans, the layout. So we do all of this research for families because they don't have the time and energy and they don't know what questions to ask.
That's huge, Annalee, right there. Yeah. They don't know what questions to ask. And that is a huge service because you have the experience, you know what to look for. But you mentioned that, you thought, oh, wow, I'm going to just be able to educate people and get them to be proactive. And, we do that in our business. I'm in the financial business. And we're constantly trying to educate our families before something happens. But I think it's a basic human instinct that we don't do anything till we're in pain. Right. A lot of times. Yeah. And this is not a fun thing to talk about. No. What if we can't live a quality of life? What do we do? It's not a fun conversation.
Also, Jill, what people's view is of what is proactive. I know when we were in that situation of caring for our parents, proactive to me meant that I was going to be there and I was going to take care of them. Whereas really proactive means looking at what services are there to help you and really what's best for your parent. I know for my mom, after my father passed away, and at this point she had pretty extensive dementia, and we thought it would be best for her to continue living in their apartment that they lived in together, which was absolutely the worst thing for her. She was totally isolated. She forgot that my father passed away, so she was looking for him, and everything that she saw reminded her of him. And really the best thing was to move her into a memory care facility. Ultimately, she was happier, she was more stable, I mean, it was just such a huge difference. And so my attitude or my view of what proactivity was really completely different than what I thought it was when we first were put in this situation, you know?
Go ahead.
I think that's key that you just said that, because that's why I facilitate the family meetings, because everyone, and that's why we have just that discovery and strategy session first with the adult kids, because everyone has their own idea and their own relationship with their parent, and they have their own idea and opinions of what quality of life is, how care should be delivered. Like, should we have home care? Are we expecting the oldest daughter, who always ends up getting the brunt of caregiving? You know, what are the expectations? What conversations have you had as a family? And most families haven't had any. And that's why we're meeting, right? Is because they haven't had any type of strategy developed yet. So I wanted to kind of button up on the aging plan, to go back to that just a little bit. So that aging plan, because that matrix project that we do for families is huge, because families don't have the time and the energy and the emotional bandwidth to do all of that research, and they wouldn't know what to ask about in the first place. It takes our team about 25 hours per geographic location. Right?
And the matrix plan is looking into the available facilities for their parents? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so that they have a short-term plan and a long-term plan.
And can you tell us the differences between each type of facility?
Yeah, so that's actually what we teach our clients. We have a whole meeting just about that. So that's what I mean. It's all about education, because families usually don't know what the difference is between independent living, assisted living, memory care, skilled rehab, skilled nursing, palliative care. They just don't know. So we have a whole meeting where we teach them about that. We have that's why there's 5 to 8 meetings, right?
Right.
And because it's too much information for them to digest all at once. So there's about 20 components to an aging plan. And that's one of them, is helping them understand the differences in levels of care. And so we also teach them how to be bold advocates. We have a 6-page checklist that I've personally created, because we have a patient advocacy division as well, of everything that families, you wouldn't think that you have to check on with your loved one, but you do when they're when they're receiving care of any kind, whether it's home care or in a care community. We also include a 7-page checklist on what questions to ask and what to look for when they tour care communities, because it's intimidating.
Let's talk about, Annalee, you mentioned being an advocate, and I want to stop here for a minute, because I think no matter what care plan you have, if you're talking about somebody like the children caring for their parents, they still have to be an advocate. And what is their position, and what do they do to be an advocate? Because I know with my mom, there were 7 of us, locally pretty much all the time.
I felt sorry for the facility she was in, because
we still had challenges, though, that she wasn't cared as well as we thought she should be, right? It was either the wrong medication at the wrong time, or they didn't get her out of bed. Like, all of a sudden we'd call over there and they're like, she's still in bed. It's 1:00. We're like, what? Like, you have to get over there. You have to get her moving to get out of bed, So there was still that advocacy, even though we were surrounded by all these, people that were caring for her, we had to be an advocate. So could you talk a little bit more about the advocacy? Like, is there anything really important our audience needs to know or about being an advocate?
Yes, that's why there's 6 pages of it, because it's true. It's just, and the care in a lot of these communities wasn't great before the pandemic, and now it's even worse because we have a shortage of workers, right? And so things that families, when you're advocating for your loved one, just some simple things like, do they have their dentures in? Because how can we expect mom to eat and not lose weight if she's not even wearing her dentures?
Right.
The next question is, the dentures that she's wearing, are they hers?
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Gosh. Yeah.
So, you'd be surprised what happens. Especially in like a memory care unit. These residents are there because they wander, right? That's why it's a secured unit. They go in and they go shopping in other people's rooms, and they come out with their glasses. My mom had, they come out with all sorts of stuff. They go shopping. And so things like that, do they have their glasses on? Are they their glasses? Label everything that you can, for one. Do they have their hearing aids in? Are the hearing aids charged? Do they have a cell phone? Is the cell phone charged? Is the cell phone too complicated for them to use? Or do they need to get more of an easier model, like a jitterbug, for example, where you can just call out, because that's all you need to do is be able to call out? Are they getting bathed? I've had, especially with the pandemic and the staffing shortages and families not being able to get in there, once they were able to get in and they're like, I don't think my mom has been bathed for a year. And they were right, because there was no documentation of it. And in healthcare, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Right. So there's families that you've got to check to make sure that they're on a bath schedule and that they're actually getting bathed. You need to check their skin. I hate to say this, you just can't simply rely on, just because you're paying thousands of dollars a month for care in these facilities, you still have to be actively involved. And that's why families need support through this whole process, because your caregiving shifted into something different. Now you're more of the advocate, and sometimes you still have to toilet your loved one too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I found too that once we did put my mother in a facility, it really allowed us, we still each had a job, and we were very fortunate because there were so many of us, but it also then allowed us to kind of go back to having that mother-daughter relationship and actually spend time just being with each other. Because before that, any time that we spent was taking care of them.
Yeah.
And it changes the whole dynamic. So that made it really good. I wanted to just real briefly, because this is what touched home with me, is that you do this, what would you call the search, where you searched all the facilities.
The community matrix.
That you can determine maybe what the best type of facility is for the parent. That you can do all of that, because that, to me, was the part that was overwhelming. Before my father passed away, we were looking at facilities that were completely not the right type of facility for my mom. We were very fortunate. I don't know how we stumbled upon the memory care place that we did, but we were very fortunate. But before that, we were looking at places that weren't even suitable for her needs. And we didn't know that. We were looking at more, how pretty was it?
Yeah.
How comfortable did it look? Which really didn't have anything to do with her needs.
What do you think, Annalee, as you work with families, what is the most important question when you're looking at facilities? Most important. I know you got a ton of them.
Oh, gosh, there's 7 pages of them. I guess the most important questions, I think, because the admissions person or the marketing person, their job is to sell the bed or sell the unit, right? Sell that space that they have available. So I think the most important questions that you can ask are actually out in the parking lot when people are coming and going that are most likely family members, and say, you know what, my name is Annalee. I'm here to tour for one of my loved ones. Do you have a loved one here, and what's your experience? If you had to do this over again, would you have your loved one move into this care community? So I think that that's probably one of the most important questions, is getting actual feedback from people who have loved ones there and get their input.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know one of the things we run in quite often as our clients might be thinking about the care choices is they don't think about the long-term care. It's just what do they need today?
Right.
So they might go in a facility that's just a retirement community and it offers some support, but it might not have memory care. It might not have skilled care. And, I think that's something that's, happens quite often.
That happens a lot. And that's one of the reasons why families bring me in, because they didn't know what they didn't know, or they went through like a placement company where, they don't do any planning. They just place someone. And so they end up, if they can't stay there because of behaviors, because there's no memory care community that's a part of that continuum, or if mom needs one level of care and dad needs a different level of care, and that wasn't in the consideration list when they moved into that particular care community, then they have to move again, right? So another mistake is families assume that, well, even if I run out of money, I'll be able to stay here. And that's not entirely the case. Like maybe you chose a care community that doesn't contract with Medicaid.
Right.
You know? And so then what happens is then the adult kids are like, oh, mom's been there for 2 years and they love her there. And she's so happy she's adjusted, but who's going to pay that $13,000 assisted living bill or that $13,000 memory care, whatever it is, who's going to pay that? Because if that care community doesn't contract with Medicaid, you may need to move out.
Yeah, and boy, those movements are tough, aren't they?
And they are tough.
Yeah.
And so this is why it's difficult, because now they're coming to us in crisis, a financial crisis, right?
Yeah.
If mom and dad can't afford to stay in this care community that they got placed in by someone, or they chose this care community. And now it's really hard to, it's always been difficult to try to find a care community that might have 2 openings for people who are on Medicaid. And that's why we end up with one parent in one facility and one in the other, because nobody properly planned with them in the first place. And that's why I'm fee for service. So families pay me. So I'm their advocate versus commission driven off of those companies that just do placement.
Now that you talked about financials, because I have a feeling that's part of your plan. Right? Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you help families?
Absolutely, because people, this is why I like doing these podcasts, because a lot of families, they don't realize that you or your loved one have to financially qualify to get into these care communities. You have to physically qualify. You have to pass the cognitive assessment. And so when you talk about how you kind of spent a lot of time touring care communities that weren't suitable, that's what we save the families the time, the energy, and the frustration from, because we're like, there's no point in touring these communities over here because they're not viable. So they're not options for you and your family. Right. And because the families are in crisis, we don't have the luxury of time. We've got to get this stuff done right away. And the value of the matrix as well is we're not looking to just move mom and dad out of the home, right? We're looking at what's the short-term need and the long-term need. At least this way, when the family is ready to start those tours, they've got the tools that they need to be successful to do those tours. They know what to look for, what to ask about, and they know how to be a bold advocate. Most clients, though, they're never one and dones. Usually they're not one and dones. They have us do the aging plan, and then they retain us on an ongoing care package to go on the tours with them virtually, of course, because our clients are all across the country. So when you talk about the financial picture, that is what we need to get, is what is the monthly income and what is the net worth, essentially. Are there VA benefits? What can we leverage? Is there a long-term care insurance policy? Because we can't do the matrix without knowing that information, because again, you have to financially qualify to get into these care communities.
And a lot of times the kids have no idea, right?
I was just going to say that.
What their finances are, because the parents haven't talked about it.
A lot of seniors have no idea either. Everybody seems to think that Medicare is this like end-all be-all payer source. And they're like, so their eyeballs are like these big saucers when I'm like, because they're like, well, doesn't Medicare pay for everything that my parents need from here until death? I'm like, no.
Right. And
Medicare
most of the time,
is insurance.
Right. And it only lasts 90 plus days, right?
Potentially.
Then you're on your own. Yeah.
And that's rare. It's up to 100 days, but you have to meet very strict Medicare criteria. And Medicare keeps cutting back, right? So it's even less and less and less. So you're not even up to par yet before you're discharged from Medicare. So that's why these family meetings are so important, to help families understand that, because the value proposition is not only we're putting a plan together for mom and dad, which is actually a supportive plan for the kids, but this way it's not too late for the adult kids to go, oh my gosh, I thought Medicare paid for everything. I need to make sure that I'm buttoned up financially and have everything in place for me, because I'm not putting my kids through this. The other thing financially that most families don't understand, because again, they're in uncharted territory, is home care across the country companion care was roughly, $18, $21, depending on where you live, $21 to $28 an hour. But because of the pandemic and the increased operating costs from PPE, additional, training and bodacious sign-on bonuses, because they're all short, most of these places are short-staffed. Now I've got clients even in the Naples market paying $45 and $60 an hour, because these companions are, they only make 13-ish an hour. So they obviously don't live in Naples, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So they have to drive an hour in some cases. They have to drive an hour just to get to that client. And so from a financial perspective, you've got to be, and as financial advisors, you have to know this stuff, because you have to incorporate an extra budget, more cushion in that financial plan to accommodate the additional cost of care.
Yeah.
Right. So I have two things to add. Number one is that I just want to say to those listeners out there, anybody who is currently in a position of crisis or nearing with caretaking of their parents, what an absolute emotional relief for me it was when we finally found a place for my mom and got her into it and had a plan in place that we know was the best care for her. What a relief. I mean, and we're healthy generally and had physical impairments or pains and whatnot during all of this process, because the stress is so high and you literally just box it up and put it aside, not thinking about your own health, and it catches up with you. The other thing I wanted to add was, ideally is for people to plan ahead, not wait for a moment of crisis. And is it the parents that initiate this, or
No?
Let's walk through.
Okay.
So, Annalee, you were hoping people plan ahead. What would be the perfect plan ahead situation?
Right.
Like, walk us through that.
what
Because
could
maybe
you
our
tell
listeners
people?
will plan ahead.
Right.
What does that look like?
So ideally, we don't wait until there's a medical crisis to, like, oh my gosh, to be blindsided to realize how ill prepared they were. So ideally, when you start, anytime you have aging parents in general, like, we should probably put a plan together, because if you don't, you as adult kids will end up thrust into that role of family caregiving. And when it ends up being a long-term thing, it doesn't end up feeling very good. So ideally, if you have aging parents, no matter how old they are, we need to be talking, right? What is the plan? But especially if you start seeing them declining, like losing weight, or when you go over it, we're doing this podcast after COVID, right? So families are starting to be able to travel and those kind of things. And they're popping open the refrigerator of mom and dad. And they're like, oh my gosh, they're eating terrible food. Like it's outdated and stuff. So falls, weight loss, memory impairment, memory progression, short-term memory loss, in and out to the hospital, frequent falls, disease progression like Parkinson's. If they're starting to have more falls or difficulty communicating, if they're missing their doctor's appointments, and the doctor's office calls you, provided that you've already got that set up and the HIPAA paperwork filled out. But just when you're starting to notice declines, that's a good time that we need to be talking, because those declines aren't going to just stop, right? None of us come out of this aging thing unscathed. It's going to be a bumpy ride. And you would hope that the aging process brings families together. But I'm here to tell you, if you don't know how to communicate as a family, and you don't know what to expect during that aging process, and if you have a loved one with dementia, most of my clients have dementia and their families have no idea how to communicate with them. And that's again why we have those family meetings, is to help educate them so they can have more meaningful and positive and enjoyable visits with them.
There's so much to talk about here, Annalee. I know for us, as we deal with our clients, and I know you do a lot of education for financial advisors, right? Because what happens is a lot of times the kids don't notice. They're out of the state. Maybe they visit mom once a year, or they don't want to admit. We've had families that literally, there are some of the kids that are just like, no, mom's fine.
Yes.
She doesn't need any help. So, the real goal for us, it doesn't always happen, but to ask our clients, do they have a plan in place while they're really well? And but that's a hard discussion, because they don't even know what questions to think about. So to have a conversation with you at that point to say, what are the things I need to think about? What kind of planning do I need to think about putting in place? Not that we're putting a plan in place yet, but do I want to be in my home? Is that our goal? Or am I going to go move next to my daughter? Is that my goal? To chat about those ahead of time. And of course, to have the ability to share finances with the children when it's right in a very simple manner so that they can understand it. So all of that stuff has to be done ahead of time before there's any issues. But what I love about you working with the financial advisors is they're sometimes the first ones to notice. The first ones to notice that something's off with their clients.
Yes, because I want to add to that, at least with our parents, I think a lot of parents, they kind of cover up for each other's ailments. My father totally covered up for my mom's beginning stages of dementia.
Yes, I forgot about
that. He felt like he was giving her the best care by doing and talking for her, which actually made it worse for her. So one could not function without the other. My mother did all the physical stuff to cover up my father's physical ailments, and my dad covered up for my mother's mental ailments. And as they got worse and worse, it became really difficult.
Well, and you're right. Denial is a great place to be until you can't be there anymore.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so what happens is, because a lot of kids, 30 years ago when I first started helping families, kids lived down the street from each other. But as everybody started moving away, if they didn't invest the time, the energy, the effort, and the resources in maintaining relationships with each other, then when there's that medical crisis, like dad having a stroke because he's so burned out taking care of mom, who has her days and nights mixed up, and she's agitated, she's paranoid, she thinks he's stepping out on her, or that he's stealing money. Those are all normal, typical things with dementia, and you can only be in that environment for so long before you end up having a medical crisis on your own as a primary caregiver. Mm-hmm. So once that primary caregiver has that medical condition, they have a 65% higher mortality rate. So no one should be shocked if their parent, who's the primary caregiver, has a stroke, a heart attack, or a medical condition, or has major depression or anxiety, because this is a full-time job being a caregiver. And not everybody was wired to be a caregiver, right?
Absolutely.
And so when there's that medical crisis of the primary caregiver, that's when the kids fly home all of a sudden on those mission trips and rescue missions that are expensive. And then that's when they're like, holy cow, they're blindsided by how poorly their parents have been doing for a long, long time. But to the kids, they're like, oh, this must have just happened. And I'm like, no, this has been going on for a long time. So a lot of times when families find me or get referred to me, because most of my business is word of mouth referrals, I don't advertise. So all of my clients refer other family members to me and stuff. And so most of my clients that have memory impairment and dementia, they are well into their disease when the kids are finally realizing, oh my gosh, mom is wandering out, or she's sundowning, or she just hit dad, or dad hasn't been able to even take a shower for 3 weeks because anytime he tries to do something on his own, his wife is like right there hovering over him to say, what are you doing and stuff. So that's what I'm talking about. Families are in a bad way when they come to me. So when we talk about proactive planning, if you have parents at all, let's talk.
Exactly.
But especially if you're starting to see declines in your parents. And one major mistake I see with many families is they know their loved one has dementia, right? Maybe they already took them to the doctor, they've got a diagnosis, or they've already noticed that things are changing with their mom or their dad, but they don't do any research to learn about dementia. And so they're still trying to correct them and bring them into our reality, or they're still saying, well, no, mom, dad died 4 years ago. And now mom's like grieving all over because to her, this is like the first time she's heard of it. And she's like, I didn't get to go to his funeral. And so, families need to start doing some research and understanding the diseases that their parents have.
That's huge, Annalee. And I can imagine a big part of the work you do is keeping families together. I mean, wouldn't it be great if families actually deepen their relationships through the care of their parents?
I know ours. We did.
I can imagine that you help that process because all of these emotions, all of these, just not knowing, right, about the disease and how to handle. And then the closer you are to your parents, the more emotional. I mean, you're just emotional, right? You feel the guilt, or you don't understand why mom can't have a conversation with you. It's just really, really emotional, and it's tough for families. Yeah. So how great that you're able to help that process.
Yeah. And I just want to add one more thing that you tapped into that I thought was important. to talk to the audience about, and that is even with those people who are those caregiver type that can last for extended time and know exactly what to do, maybe if they understood sooner before that big crisis came that caretaking takes a community, that it's a team effort, that is the best care that they can get, that the child alone, even though their love is greater than any other for that parent, cannot provide, no matter what, the best care without reaching out and accepting the community to help them. For both of them, right?
Absolutely.
That's right. One of the things that my clients, and I've had literally thousands, because I've been at this for a long time, right? So I have thousands of clients. The one thing they always come back with is, Annalee, if I had to do this over again, do you know what it is? I would have asked for help. As a primary caregiver, I would have asked for help.
Before,
and that's why it's so important. That's why we have these family meetings to say, what is everybody's role? And what do you as the primary caregiver need to take off your role for your own well-being? Caregiving and aging can be a positive and joyful experience if we have an aging plan, if we're communicating well and effectively and productively as a family. And it can be a joyful experience if we know what the resources are that we need to put into place now to make sure that mom and dad are safe, healthy, having the best quality of life and the best quality of care possible. And that's what that aging plan does. And when you don't have a plan, you're doing this willy-nilly. And it's one thing to take a vacation willy-nilly without putting a plan in place. But for God's sake, when you've got aging parents and they're vulnerable and they are dependent on you or strangers to take care of them, it's not good to just be willy-nilly about aging.
Right.
Pretty important. And chances are, if you're the parent, right, that is in your older years still doing well, if you don't put a plan in place, who knows what kind of care you're going to get, right? Or even
that's where the crisis
your family doesn't
happens,
know, right? So for them, they really should be the ones starting that proactive conversation, right, with their families.
They should be, but there's a lot of pride and a lot of denial. You know, when you're out playing golf 4 days a week and tennis 3 days a week, they're like, oh, this is never going to happen to me. But guess what? It happened.
Right.
And truthfully, how early can you put the full plan? I mean, you can start the discussions and stuff, but you don't know when you're active and your brain is working. A year from now, are you going to have a stroke or are you going to start getting dementia? So your plan might be different. So I wanted to kind of move into, okay, what can we tell people? What kind of resources do they have that you can provide, say, before they contact you? Because a lot of people like to do their homework first, especially if they're a little weary about saying, okay, we're actually going to talk about this, when it's kind of not an easy thing to talk about with each other, let alone with a stranger coming into the picture. So what kind of resources do you offer? I know you've written a book.
I did. So I've had literally thousands of families say, I wish there was a manual on what to do with mom and dad. And they don't mean it in a negative way. It's just that they're like, I want to do right by my parents, but I don't know how to do it right. Right. Because again, we're in uncharted territory. So I wrote the book, The Invisible Patient, The Emotional, Financial, and Physical Toll on Family Caregivers. On the cover, it's available on Amazon and Audible as well. The cover has an empty bench on it. And the reason I chose the bench is because by the time families come to me, they're so lonely, they're burned out, they think they're in this journey alone because they don't have enough supports in place and they don't have a plan, right? Caregiving doesn't have to be a terrible experience if we can reach these families sooner rather than later before they end up getting burned out.
So this book is kind of like an outline of where they can start and how having the plan can help them. And
it's thick because I had it done in big font. Right?
Oh, I like that.
Plus, a lot of it is checklists. There's like 30 some pages of just checklists and bullet points. So like how to tour care communities, how to facilitate your own family meeting. There's scripts in there, like how to talk about end of life, how to interview home care companies, understanding dementia, understanding how to pay for care. It's as much content as I could put in that met my editor's criteria for how many pages I could have.
And this is geared towards caregivers. What about, say, a parent early in life that just wants to kind of plan ahead for themselves? Would that be beneficial to them as well?
It absolutely would, because it's opening the doors of conversation. So there's scripts in there and checklists of considerations that families need to be thinking about, whether you're the mom and the dad or the adult kids.
Okay. And you also have a website?
I do. It's www.carerightinc.com, and that's CARERIGHTINC.com.
Great. And then on that website has lots of information of how they can kind of do their research ahead of time and kind of learn how they can benefit from reaching out, taking a community instead of doing it all themselves.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's an online calendar, so they can find a time that works for them for their complimentary consult. I've got clients in 32 different states. That continually grows because everything that we do with Care Right touches every single door across America. So everybody knows someone who's aging, who's a daughter or son who's going to be thrust into that role of family caregiving, and everyone knows families in that dementia journey.
Okay, so this is great. So they actually have a complimentary consult, so they can set up a meeting just to ask you questions, their questions about, okay, what does this mean for me, and their concerns and everything. That's fantastic.
Annalee, I think we could have like 10 hours of conversation here because we just touched lately. I want to get into the family dynamics, and I think we're going to have another podcast. But thank you so much for joining us today, at least introducing this topic, because I know it is top of mind for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
And if it isn't top of mind, it could be someday. So thank you so much for your resources, your book, your website. We really encourage our audience to, get on that website, take a look at those resources.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I'm going to
Annalee.
buy your book for my kids.
Yeah, you better put a plan in place, now, because you are getting older, Thanks, Annalee.
Thank you so much, Annalee.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.